We're going to take a closer look at the military's failure to diagnose and treat the signature wound of the Iraq War, traumatic brain injury, or TBI. A Pentagon memo uncovered this morning by USA Today warns that the military lacks a comprehensive plan to identify and care for soldiers with TBI. And on Capitol Hill, House Democrats called for $450 million to research and treat TBI.
The real toll is coming out now. The Pentagon is releasing a report saying 1 in 5 American servicemen and women who have been in Iraq are coming back with brain injuries, mild traumatic brain injuries, more than 250,000 people. That legacy of that will last all of our lifetimes, and it's incalculable.
When an improvised exploding device, an IED, delivers its blast, if you survive it, whether you lose a limb or not, your brain is violently shaken inside the skull.
It happens when powerful shock waves from nearby explosions jar the soldiers' brains. The problem is compounded because after a blast, soldiers without visible injuries don't always see the need for medical attention.
Often these soldiers won't seek help in theater, and it's important that they get care, at the time of the injury.
So imagine a soldier coming home with a traumatic brain injury, mild or otherwise. Maybe he or she has all 4 limbs, and maybe not. But that soldier could go through neurotrauma rehabilitation for years.
You see pictures of soldiers coming home, reuniting with their families, and everything was great. We didn't have that kind of reunion. When I saw him for the first time, I was disappointed. He was just different, and I couldn't understand why.
Because sometimes the neurons heal, sometimes they don't. And if the brain does heal, it heals very, very slowly.
Now, how are you?
I feel pretty good.
Feeling better?
I guess so.
Sure you're all right?
Uh-huh.
You positive?
I feel all right now.
Absolutely sure?
I feel swell.
Oh,
None of that twisting and stretching and tearing is likely to show up on a CAT scan, an MRI, or an EEG.
Traditional imaging studies such as CT or MRI are not nearly sensitive enough to detect individual axonal injuries or even relatively large groups of axonal injuries. CT and MRI are designed to detect areas of bleeding. Unless a blood vessel or multiple vessels are torn, creating a relatively large bleed, these studies fail to demonstrate any findings that would indicate the presence of multiple, widespread, and microscopic axonal injuries that can result in devastating neuropsychological deficits.
A neurosurgeon knows how to cut a skull open and take out a tumor or relieve pressure or whatever, and then, if he or she is good, put it back together. But what if there's nothing even a brain surgeon can do? I mean, they're not rocket scientists, which is why they typically hand off a TBI patient to one or more specialists who are. So now I'll describe my experience that first month, not so much that you know what I lived with and live with still, but what each one of those statistics lives with in varying degrees. For me, over the next week, each day the symptoms got worse and new symptoms appeared, which is fairly typical for TBI. At first, besides the aches and pains from the jolt, I felt like I had the flu and was deeply grieving, and I slept a lot.
I felt like I was moving in slow motion, and I felt terrible.
I would burst into tears and started having trouble talking. I would stammer and I couldn't sustain a narrative. The accident was on a Wednesday evening, and Monday morning I recounted the accident to a colleague on the phone and ended up holding my head in my hands and told him I'm a f***ing wreck. A gerund not normally in my vocabulary. I thought if I could just take that week off, I'd be okay. That morning I spent a few hours in the ER, but a CAT scan showed no bleeding. The attending physician walked me through an informal neurotest involving balance and counting backwards from 100 by sevens. I failed that miserably. So next stop was a neurologist, who immediately noticed on my neck x-ray clear signs of whiplash. I failed his informal neurotest too, and here's when it really hit me. He said to go home and to spend the next 3 weeks doing nothing. No mental or physical exertion of any kind. He said if it were up to him, I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. For the next 10 days or so, I basically sat out in the backyard on a bench swing, all bundled up and looking at the trees slowly change color. This was, after all, autumn in New England, and we sit on 3.5 acres. One day, as I lay perfectly still on that bench, the biggest hawk I've ever seen flew over and stood on top of it. He stayed there about 15 seconds, and I felt blessed. I also observed distant airplanes leaving white streams behind them that would fade into the blue sky. I thought, that's what my memory is like. I developed a tan, and people said, "Hey, you look great," which is the biggest disconnect of this injury. How I look tells you nothing about what's going on inside, cognitively or emotionally. Another friend told me what I wouldn't give for some time off. As the days wore on, my symptoms persisted. In addition to the tinnitus and hyperacusis, which is sensitivity to noise, I was having real problems with memory, speech, formulating responses, and I continued to feel fluey and grief-stricken. I also slept a lot. One low point came a couple of weeks after the accident when my brother called just to ask how I was doing. I stammered so badly I became incoherent, and the cognitive effort devastated me through the next day. 2 weeks of doing nothing into the 3 weeks the neurologist prescribed, Lynn called him and said I wasn't getting any better. In fact, I seemed to be getting worse. He had her schedule an MRI for me that night. Well, the MRI results were great, which is also pretty typical for a so-called mild traumatic brain injury. But he noted my lack of progress. In fact, he called it regress. He had us schedule a sleep-deprived EEG to examine the brain circuitry. Another piece of the puzzle, he called it. He remained confident that I would fully recover. The EEG itself was a breeze. The hardest part was the interview beforehand when I stammered and had memory lapses. The results of this test also showed no problems. He told me I had 2 options. Do nothing and let nature take its course, and we all know how unreliable nature can be.
It's moving fast! Coming towards you, Joe!
Or see Beth Adams, a highly regarded neurotrauma case manager. We decided to see Beth. She specializes in evaluating cognitive skills and developing the coping skills that help brain-injured people try to get back to their lives and functioning again. Talking, problem-solving, even getting back to work. Beth became my recovery strategist, resource coordinator, and she noted progress just about every time I saw her, so that was great. She works a lot with boxers and professional wrestlers, and I'm neither of those.